So many of you are familiar with Zero Trust Data Security Guide that was published in October 2004. And this was a consortium of government CIOs and CDOs that came together and said, how do we help agencies build a roadmap to secure data and ultimately protect national security and the economic interests of the United States? So over the next 9 minutes, I'm going to walk through a game plan for how an agency might implement the Zero Trust Data Security Guide and ultimately secure our most high-value asset, which is our data. So this guide is broken up into 5 different stages. Number 1, know your data. So do I have full visibility into what data is on the network? What data is the most sensitive? Do we have the visibility and context needed to perform a risk assessment? So how is the data exposed? What systems are storing that information? What happens if those systems were to be compromised? And then once I have this information, I know my data, I've inventoried all of my sensitive data, I know the risk associated with it. How do I build this into my Zero Trust implementation plans and ensure that data is prioritized? This informs those plans, gives me the ability to actually execute on the journey towards delivering on the target level of Zero Trust. From there, how do I design the controls and how to bring data into those controls? So automatically applying those labels and ensure those labels are used to enforce policies to ensure that data remains protected. And then lastly, do I have the visibility I need to monitor the activity on the data? Do I have the data sensing, data monitoring, and can I use that information in an automation orchestration workflow to automatically revoke risky activity? And so fundamentally, this is what the Zero Trust plan is saying. And the reality is that we've made a lot of investments historically on the perimeter, and data continues to be the target. We've invested in IDS, IPS, network security, device security, and still data breaches are happening. The bottom line is that attackers are coming from multiple directions, but they're all heading in one direction, and that is the data itself. So we can do everything right on the perimeter, but if we have a data breach, then our entire security program has failed. And this is important because data is where the damage happens. It isn't just recovering from a ransomware incident or restoring a system or a compliance fine. Data breaches cause lasting damage. It can impact the mission of the agency. If we're a federal healthcare organization, it can prevent us from providing quality of care to servicemen and women. It can impact national security, the economic interests of the United States of America. And once data is breached, we can't bring it back. Just like we can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, we can't recover from a data breach. Once that information is in the public domain, it's all over. And so the idea is that we need to put the controls in place to protect the data before it leaves the network and ensure that we don't have a breach in the first place. And that's where we want to get to. And this is a challenge because the blast rate continues to grow. Agencies have large on-premises data stores. They're rapidly adopting SaaS applications. They're sending workloads into IaaS environments like AWS, Azure, and GCP. You have users continuously adding data. They're sharing and collaborating with content in platforms like Teams and SharePoint Online and 365. Developers are spinning up new resources and workloads in AWS. And with all this complexity and chaos comes increased risk. So data is becoming more and more difficult to secure as we're adopting all these new platforms, especially as we start to roll out generative AI solutions, whether it's an AI agent like Microsoft Copilot or our own large language models. And what we've found is that most approaches result in busy work followed by a breach. Classification scans never finish. There's not the ability to fully inventory all of our sensitive data. We have no ability to ensure that the protections are in place, secure that content. Without a full inventory of sensitive data, we're never going to be able to apply the labels on all the information and use those labels in the downstream DLP controls or actually enforce the policies. Once we find that information, if we're not able to label it, how do we actually protect it? How do we ensure that it's not exposed either in the cloud or on premises to bad actors or individuals that should never have access to the information? And ultimately, how do we get eyes on the data so we can identify when we have a compromised identity and stop data from leaving the network? And so there are a few fundamental questions that we need to answer if you want to attempt to implement the Zero Trust Data Security Guide. Number 1, can we define the data? So do we have that full inventory of what data is sensitive? Can we secure the information? Running that risk assessment, stage 2, that Zero Trust Data Security Guide. Do we understand the risk associated with that data? And can we effectively lock it down? Can we manage the information? Effective data governance, eliminating redundant, obsolete, or trivial information. Can we take those labels and extend our Zero Trust policies down to the data itself? going beyond just applications and identities, but actually sending those policies to the data to ensure they're protected. And ultimately, and most importantly, can we detect a data breach and stop the attack before that data leaves the network, before it leaves the perimeter? And so what telemetry do we need to do this? Well, number one, we talked about sensitivity. So the full and complete inventory of all the sensitive data across our full data state, on premises, in the cloud, all of our large unstructured data stores, databases, IaaS workloads, fully inventorying all that information, understanding how it's exposed, so performing that risk assessment step in the data security guide. Do we have users with far more access to data than they need? What applications are connected to that data? Are those applications sanctioned or are they potentially risky? And then how do we monitor the activity? Do we have the audit trail to know how users are using the data day in and day out so we can start to understand risk and automatically identify risky behavior? So these are the core ingredients that we need to effectively secure the data and actually build our zero trust data security plan. And imagine where we had those ingredients. We're going to drive three primary outcomes. They're going to get us to a state where the data is secured and we're moving down the path to zero trust. Number one, real-time visibility. We talked about this earlier, but it's putting all these ingredients in context with each other. The sensitivity, the access, the risk, how data is configured in the cloud, is it potentially exposed, what applications are being used. And it's important that these scans are complete with no gaps. They're contextual, meaning they have the information we need to drive the risk assessment and implement the controls, and they're continuous. So as users are creating new data, they're spinning up new resources, data is always classified, data is always protected. Once we have that visibility, the next step is start driving action and driving controls. This means remediating excessive permissions. So if I have exposed information via groups, or I have data sitting in the cloud and I have risky configurations, can I remediate those risky configurations to ensure that data is not exposed to the internet or to unauthorized users or bad actors? Can I apply labels to that data so I can use those labels to enforce the just-in-time access policies in Zero Trust, along with my other downstream DLP controls? Can I revoke or eliminate any third-party apps? This is a big attack vector that we're seeing across a lot of federal agencies, especially when end users or IT administrators are creating applications or granting consent to that application to a lot of data without necessarily knowing the impact. And then can we effectively manage the data? Getting rid of redundant, obsolete, trivial information, managing the full data lifecycle so we don't have unnecessary risk in our environment. And then the last outcome is really, can we identify an attack on the data? And that means that we need the right visibility. So all the activity on the data across on-premises, cloud resources, do we know what the users are doing and what they're accessing? Enriching that audit trail, so performing analytics, understanding if that data is sensitive, where is it coming from, building baseline profiles for each and every user so we know what's normal, and then taking that normal behavioral profile and then identifying when the user is behaving suspiciously, because ultimately attackers are not breaking in, they're logging in. So how do we detect a malicious insider or compromised identity? Well, we need to know what's normal for that identity so we can detect what is abnormal. So driving automatic threat detection, identifying a breach before it happens. I have 1 second left. So with every single customer, whether it's a prospective customer or a new Varonis customer, the first step that we take is always a risk assessment. So think of this as stages 1 and 2 of that Zero Trust Data Security Guide, highlighting visibility on where sensitive data is, building that full inventory, providing the context around the risk associated with the information, and helping you build a game plan to effectively protect that information. Thanks for listening to the presentation, and we're over there if you want to have a conversation or if you want to stop by, and appreciate it.